we've seen big boat series, and they're all great here in our venue, but there was nothing like those guys coming and driving right outside the windows at 40 knots. It was just, and then sticking the nose in every now and then. So that was fabulous. What's coming up? We've got a Elstrom Zellerbach Dane Regatta. We've got, which dates all the way back to when Paul Elstrom came here to sail the Laser for the first time. And then we've got a U.S. Match Racing Qualifier coming up. We've got a lot of good social activities.
Hi, everybody on the air. I'm sending audio off my laptop mic, so you're going to hear a lot of ambient noise, but at least we're getting you some audio.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Commodore. Wonderful, wonderful. A little bit about future speakers, and just before I mention future speakers, I would say I'm happy to announce that one of the activities, the member engagement committee, is the brand new member clipper ship lounge upstairs. We were putting the leveraging the gig economy with empty space upstairs, a beautiful view space upstairs. So from 9 to 4 every day, members are invited to come upstairs as opposed to at WeWork or at Starbucks or Pete's, where you can in fact get a beautiful view and use your laptop. The board approved this great new experiment a few days ago, and we have people up there every day. So it's an environment from 9 to 4 every day with a beautiful view where you can sit with your laptop and get work done. Yesterday, as our guest speaker came off an airplane and I wasn't available to come down and pick him up, he went and worked in the space for 3 or 4 hours before, he went off to Marin as a house guest, as our house guest. So the thing is, you can go into the space from 9 to 4 every day. It's a wonderful clipper ship lounge upstairs. A little bit about upcoming speakers. So in June, you want to stop by because on June the 12th, Luke Muller will be here to go after the last berth for a fin in the Olympics that we know of. And he's a brilliant sailor, and he's sailing with Caleb Payne as his training partner. This is a bit of a switching seats, and they're such good partners that essentially he was the training partner for Caleb when Caleb went to Rio. They did well enough, so Rio actually gave a bronze medal to Caleb, and now Luke is trying to do the same thing. So the two of them are duking out for this slot. June 5, Allison Langley will be here to talk about the beautiful, beautiful restoration of a boat called Merrily out in the East Coast. It's a beautiful restoration project. And on May 29th, T. Hutch himself, Terry Hutchinson, will be here as the skipper and executive director of the American Magic Challenge for the America's Cup from the New York Yacht Club. And as a special St. Francis welcome, you are all invited to come on Tuesday night, borrowing the format that we use for Monday Night Football, where the members cook dinner on the day off for the staff at the club. We, the youngster crew, is going to cook dinner for Terry Hutchinson, and you're welcome to come and join if you want to be part of the cooking group. Come and see me afterwards, and we'll put you in touch with us. You can do that. So that'll be a fun DIY Wednesday Yachting Luncheon on May 29th. On May 22nd, Barbara Berrig and Torella will be here to talk about saving the Delta. I should rather say saving the bay by saving the Delta, because in reality, if we don't have the Delta draining water through the bay every day, twice, we will not have the same bay. So San Francisco, Daly City, South San Francisco, Millbrae, Burlingame, San Mateo, all the way around to, Milpitas and up the coast, San Leandro, San Lorenzo, Berkeley, Emeryville, all of us are affected by the cleanliness of the bay that will not be clean if we don't save the Delta. She'll be here to tell us how we can help her do that. And next week, Alan Edwards, a terrific web designer who's built a site for the L36 class that's now available for everybody. It's got great currents and other kinds of useful tools. A little bit about our speaker today. Imagine being 2 years old, your folks are sailors, and you get put in a laundry basket under the quarterdeck. I'm sure this would pass every insurance test possible. And essentially you wake up, sailing around all the time with your folks. In fact, it is such an incredible experience that by the time you're 16, you're sailing in Long Island Sound out of American Yacht Club. Those of us who sail IODs have been in American Yacht Club a lot. And you win with the Sears Cup, holy moly. His dad was an advertising guy, And while his dad was, handling media for Young and Rubicam and Coca-Cola, he was listening to all this advertising stuff in the background. So he goes off to Tufts. Doesn't really do badly at Tufts. All-American 2 years. I mean, he was there for 4, right? Anyway, All-American for 2 years. Clearly demonstrating that he's his father's son, because his dad becomes president of USARU. That was the predecessor to U.S. Sailing. We all remember Bill H. He was a 3-year president, incredibly effective president at that. Our guest then comes back to St. Francis. Sails around out in St. Francis, this little thing we have called the Big Boat Series, these kind of slowish boats called TP-52. And he wins the Big Boat Series in 2004, okay. And then in 2007, wins the World Championship in the sonar class in his backyard marbling. What was his backyard? Come on, he won the World Championship, but it was his backyard. At any rate, we've seen enough of him. He's been sailing against St. Francis in the Morgan Cup, in the Resolute Cup, and in all kinds of big competitions. So it was about time he came out here and gave us something back and was a speaker. In the meantime, he went into advertising himself and started as a media buyer at Gray, then went to a hot agency that I knew a lot because I gave him my business when I was head of advertising for CVS, the big drugstore chain, Hill Holiday Comics in Cosmopolis. That was a rocket ship agency, did super well, and so did he. Turns out he ended up being executive vice president, not president, but executive vice president of one of the hottest ad agencies on the planet. And still found enough time to come sailing. And then somebody said, why did you become the president of the Herreshoff Museum? Herreshoff, I've heard of them. They designed boats, right? Didn't they? Weren't they maybe the #1 boat designers and yacht builders in the world at one time? Wasn't Nathanael Herreshoff the designer of 5 winning America's Cup boats? So not because he knows a lot about sailing, he's a great guy. Well, let's just give a really great welcome to my bud, a great sailor, a brilliant sailor, Bill Lynn. Come on up.
That was way too kind. It's great to be here again in the friendly confines of St. Francis Yacht Club. Best view on the planet, I think. And I've had some holy moly moments out there. Looks pretty tame right now, I would say. But it is great to be here, and I thank you for inviting me out to speak about the Herreshoff Museum. The Herreshoff Museum is a museum about the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company. As Ron said, when I first got there, I had heard of Herreshoff, of course, and I thought that sailboats is what they did. So it's a museum about the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company, which I'll refer to as HMCo a few times. So if you hear me say that, that's what I'm talking about. It's not a museum about antique boats. It is a museum about world-class design and engineering, disruptive innovation, and cutting-edge manufacturing. Our collection includes over 70 original Herreshoff boats. I'm going to tell you a bit about one boat in particular today. And I'm going to put that in the context of the way the Herreshoff brothers ran their business. I'll warn you in advance that I am not a historian. As Ron mentioned, I worked in the advertising business. So I never let the facts get in the way of a good story. But if I do this right, you might see some interesting parallels between the HMCo of 1903 and today's high-tech industry. And you might also see some parallels between the America's Cup then and the America's Cup now. So HMCo started in 1878, but it really all started in 1841 with the birth of John Herreshoff. He was the 4th of 9 children born to Charles and Julia Herreshoff. And you probably thought that I was going to say that it all started with Nat Herreshoff, but JB, brother John, was the real driver behind the company. JB was a really clever guy, and he built all kinds of really interesting things. But he went blind in one eye early in his childhood from glaucoma, and in a true stroke of bad luck, he lost the sight in his other eye to a sharp stick at age 14. So now at age 14, he's completely blind. Brother Nat, who was 7 years his junior, gave up any extracurricular activities to be John's guide. And since they shared a love of boats and a love of building things, Nat spent a lot of time with John, both on the water and in the shop. During the winter of 1859 and 1860, John and their father, Charles, decided to build a catboat so they could sail it down to New York to see the Great Eastern. The Great Eastern was this 700-foot-long iron monstrosity that could carry 4,000 people. It was like the seventh wonder of the world at the time. So when they're going to build this catboat, they start with a half-hull carved from a block of pine. That's a picture of it there. 11-year-old Nat's job is to actually take the lines off of the block of pine so that they can build the mold over which they'll build the boat. This is what got him interested in yacht design, and it's the design process that he would use for the rest of his life. It's a very interesting design process. We have at the museum over 500 of these half-hulls in our model room. And
Is it off on the side?
we got it. So this is just a quick panoramic video of the model room at the museum, and you can see how prolific the guy was. So every one of these models was carved by hand, and this is the precursor to the 3D modeling techniques that we use today. This model is particularly cool because it's actually the patent model for the catamaran that he invented in 1876 and patented in 1877.
And Long Island Yacht Racing Association of Long Island Sound outlawed in 78.
And it continues to. You still can't race a multi-hull against a monohull. That was
1988 proved that.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we've seen that too, actually. So John, now 18, continues to build boats, starting in this small tannery shed that's across the street from the family home. He's pretty prolific at this boat building thing, and he becomes known as the blind boat builder of Bristol. Nat, meanwhile, has gone to MIT in 1866, and he finishes a 3-year course of study there in mechanical engineering. Gets a job at the Corliss Steam Engine Company in Providence as a draftsman in 1870. Corliss built big steam engines to power factories and mills and things like that. And in 1876, young Nat actually gets put in charge of this steam engine, which actually powered the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. So while Nat's working at Corliss by day, he's actually designing boats at night for JP's boat building company, which was starting to get some traction, and it had outgrown the little tannery shed on the shore of the bay there. The company built about 35 boats between 1868 and 1877, all designed by Captain Nat, all taken from half-hulls that he had carved by hand, who, keep in mind, has no formal training as a naval architect. He's just making this stuff up. And this is also the second industrial revolution. Steam power is changing the way Americans live and work. The Herreshoffs were obsessed with the concept of developing smaller, lighter, faster, safer steam power plants that could fit into boats while still delivering the horsepower needed to go fast. And in 1878, Nat leaves Corliss Steam Engine Company and joins JB to found HMCo, the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company in Bristol. The yacht racing scene as we know it now didn't really exist then, and though they loved sailing, their sole focus was on steam engines and powerboats. So when they started HMCo, they agreed on a few important founding principles. They wouldn't build anything they didn't design, and they wouldn't design anything they wouldn't build. So they wanted to maintain total control over the entire process. They wouldn't do any advertising. The product would speak for itself. They would focus on quality and charge top dollar, and they wouldn't borrow any money or take any investors. They wanted total control over the company and the product. They started out small with a contract to build a fast patrol boat for the Spanish Navy, but the company grew pretty quickly. It even had its own band, and so this band would play at each launching, and there were quite a few launchings. Over the next 10 years, the company built an average of a boat a month, ranging in size from 17 to 140 feet, almost all steam-powered boats. So what I said earlier is I always thought of Herreshoff as a sailboat brand. It actually, for the first 12 years it was a business, it was almost entirely powerboats. Their approach involved innovation in sort of the four key areas that made a powerboat go faster. Right? There were boilers, there were engines, there were propellers, and there were hulls. So the hulls needed to be lighter, the engines needed to be smaller and more powerful, the boilers needed to be safer and to be able to generate more steam pressure. And they're making all of this stuff right there on the campus. Well, they never did any advertising, and they declined all opportunities to speak to the press. They weren't beyond the odd publicity stunt. Over the winter of 1884 and 1885, they build a steam yacht called STILETTO, an experimental steam yacht for themselves. In July, they take it down to New York, where they lay in wait for what was widely considered to be the fastest boat in the world at that point. That was a side-wheel steamer called the Mary Powell, which ran between New York City and Kingston, New York, up on the Hudson. So they lay in wait for the Mary Powell, and along comes the Mary Powell, and so they take off and they pass it, and they let it pass them again, and then they pass it again. So they beat it to Kingston by 5 minutes. And because the owner of the Mary Powell is also the owner of the New York Times, this is front page news. What that leads to is catches the eye of the Secretary of the Navy, and STILETTO was purchased by the Navy in 1887 and converted to an experimental torpedo boat. You can see it here with its new Navy coloring and its torpedo tube stuck onto the front. The concept was, sort of a new one at that point. They'd come up with automobile torpedoes, and they needed a platform on which to launch them, so they could get away before they got blown up. Prior to this, what they had done was they used these things called spar torpedoes, which is a bomb on the end of a stick, and you would drive up to the bad guys and stick the bomb, had a little point on it, and it would stick into the hull of the bad guys, and then you'd back away as fast as you could, pulling the string as you went, so that the bomb would go off.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? So, the concept of torpedoes that would drive themselves and a platform from which to launch them was actually a pretty big step forward. And so, as they sort of are experimenting with the STILETTO, they ultimately get the contract to build the first torpedo boat for the U.S. Navy in 1890. This is the Cushing, and it begets a whole line of torpedo boats that they end up building over the next 10 years. This is a video, an Edison video of one of the torpedo boats that they built, and it is not a very good video. But it also is kind of indicative of the fact that you're not really sneaking up on anybody. I mean, this is a very fast boat for its day, but it is burning a lot of coal, and it is making a lot of black smoke. And so you'll see it sort of launch its torpedo, and so it's better than a spar torpedo boat, but it is not a stealth thing by any stretch.
Stealth boat. What year is that filmed?
This is from 1900, actually. So right after the Spanish-American War, when they built their 7th or 8th torpedo boat by that point. So they're well and truly. So you can see the torpedo launcher sticking out the side, and there it goes. So it's got a ways to go. But it's better than a spar torpedo boat.
You get away.
Exactly. So it's good to be able to turn fast. So by late 1890, let me go back a slide. By late 1890, the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company had built about 140 steam-powered vessels. Only 10 sailboats, mostly for friends and family. Not a sailboat company at all, but that fall, one of their best customers, who was a sporting gent from Newport named Edwin Dennison Morgan, also happened to be the New York Yacht Club Commodore, came to Nat and asked him to design and build a 46-footer. Now, the 46-footers, essentially, back then, were like the TP-52s today. That was the hot boat, and all the best designers were designing them. In Boston, it was Ned Burgess, who was coming up with these things, and that was what all the hot guys were racing. E.D. Morgan's boat was called Gloriana. Herreshoff came up with some pretty clever ways to quote-unquote fool the rule, and this boat won every single race it sailed in. The company has been in business now for over 12 years, and this is only the 11th sailboat that they built. But now, based on this, the product strategy changes. E.D. Morgan was a member of the New York Yacht Club Syndicate that built several Cup defenders, and after his success with Gloriana, he convinced the syndicate to approach Herreshoff about building a boat to defend the Cup with in 1893. And so HMCo would go on to build a long list of Cup defenders, as Ron mentioned earlier, including Vigilant in 1893, Defender in 1895, Columbia in 1899, and Constitution in 1901. But the coolest one of them all was the boat that they built to defend the Cup in 1903, and that was called Reliance. Reliance is huge. It was the biggest boat to ever sail in America's Cup. In fact, she was the biggest single-masted sailboat in the world until Mirabella 5 was built in 2003, 100 years later. And when you compare Reliance to some of the other Cup defenders of the day that we've seen over the course of the years, the red boat here is a 12-meter. The black one is your AC-75. The orange one is the Oracle Catamaran. The white one is the J-boat, and Reliance is obviously dwarfs them all. You can fit 8 12-meter sailplanes into Reliance's sailplane. It compares quite favorably to the space shuttle, and it's actually kind of funny because when kids talk about this now, you know, when anybody under the age of 30 sees this picture, they're like, "What's that thing on the right?" So I guess the space shuttle's kind of old technology now. But the boat was very extreme. It was extreme in every way, both as a standalone object and in relation to every boat of her type. 8% bigger, 8% longer on deck, 8% longer overall, about 14% more sail area. So this thing's an engineering marvel, but it's also incredibly dangerous. Over 16,000 square feet of sail area managed by a crew of 72. And it's interesting because, you know, sort of the more things change, the more they stay the same. This yacht had a Scottish helmsman, and the crew was almost entirely made up of professional Swedes. So the nationality rule didn't exist then. Now, these were all 90-footers, so they had to have a 90-foot waterline, and the rule they were built to was the Swanwick rule. It was a pretty simple formula. So it's the length of the waterline plus the square root of the sail area, and that was your over 2, all over 2, and that was your rating. So if there's mathletes in the crowd, you're probably doing this in your head, but essentially the rule rewarded lots of sail area and really long overhangs for sailing. So the whole game here was to push out the overhangs as far as you possibly could, so that even though it had a 90-foot water line at rest, it would heel over and have a much longer sailing water line. And then the other piece of it was how to get as much weight out of the boat as possible down into the keel so that you could pile on the sail area. This boat, you can see that it was about the same weight as all the other boats of its type, but it had 10 to 15% more sail area, so they figured out how to get more weight into the keel. It had a 100-ton keel. It's a complete freak. And, you know, as I said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This was, you know, Vanderbilt. We just need a boat that can win 3 races. We don't care what happens to it after that. And they banged it out, but they had no choice. The boat was ordered in October, and they had to sail into the Cup a year later. So they built it in record time. Contract was signed on October 16th. Let's see. Day 41 is mid-November, day 99, mid-January. They launch it in April. They take a couple of weeks to get the rig in, which is a pretty astonishing accomplishment in itself. Everything's set up and sails on, and they're sailing by kind of May 1 after the boat was ordered in mid-October. And it was built in complete secrecy. They had guards at the gates, at the door of the shop, and only the workers were allowed in there. The press wasn't allowed anywhere near it. No passersby. It was a complete secret. This will give you a sense of what sailing these things was like. Again, Thomas Edison filming here.
Heard of him.
Yeah, he might have. So we're essentially at the pin here, and if you're susceptible at all to seasickness, you might not want to watch this. But we're essentially looking at this from the pin. The committee boat's straight ahead. Reliance has just come around the committee boat, and Shamrock is coming towards us. Maneuvering these things is not simple as you can imagine. Trying to figure out how to trim 16,000 square feet of sail without any hydraulics is an adventure. The Cup was a pretty big deal back then too. You can see that there's hundreds of spectator boats out there. And as the boat sails by here, it gives you a pretty good look at, this concept of waterline length versus sailing length. It actually has a relatively short waterline. It's 144 feet long. And as they sail by, you can see that there's a lot more boat in the water than 90 feet. And that's a lot of people pulling on the ropes. Yep, exactly. A lot of Swedes.
Swedish steam.
Good to have a lot of Swedes. Yeah, that's where the sort of Norwegian steam term came from, except that then it was Swedish steam. This is the downwind finish. Big spinnakers. Spinnaker pole on Reliance is 84 feet long.
This was just 20 miles to windward and return.
Pretty much, yeah. And then they had a triangle course and then something else.
Another 20 miles to windward and return.
Exactly. And in the last race of this regatta, Shamrock actually got lost in the fog and never did finish the race. So the result, as you can imagine, was predictable. The Royal Ulster Yacht Club went down 0-3. Brits were quite hopeful going into race one. They really thought they had a shot, but those hopes were dashed pretty quickly. And interestingly, Reliance was actually stripped for parts almost immediately after the last race, broken up 10 years later, but found its way onto the Rhode Island Quarter in 2001, and actually with a bridge in the background that A, didn't exist in 1903, and B, this boat would not have fit under it. It would fit under this bridge, I think. So it's about 202 feet from the water line to the tippy top of the mast, and what do we have, 224 here. So it would fit under that bridge, just not the Newport Bridge.
Just barely.
Exactly, it would be close. But here's where we transition from a story about a winning boat to a story about a winning business. And when you step back and take a look at what was going on at the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company at this time, you find out some really interesting things. If you take 3 months from the beginning, 3 months from the beginning of the Reliance, the 6-month Reliance build, and 3 months to the end, and you look at that 12-month timeline, you look at the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company order book, you see that they built a total of 38 boats in that 12-month stretch. And it wasn't just any 38 boats. It was Reliance, and it was also the metal-hulled racing schooner Ingomar, one of the first racing schooners that they had built. There's a number of these things that still exist, either in the originals or in replica form. They also built 20 wooden sailboats with an average waterline length of 30 feet. These were ordered, Irolita was ordered 2 weeks before Reliance. 16 steam-powered vessels with an average length overall of 53 feet. So these are big boats that they're building. It's not just little dinghies and stuff. And they're also doing a full refit on Columbia and Constitution, which were the trial horses for Reliance. And they weren't just building the boats; they were doing the whole package. So they were building and innovating and designing equipment, rigging, and sails as well. And so you see, many people think of the Herreshoff Company and the Herreshoff brothers as just doing advanced hull designs, but they were also applying their innovative brain power to all the other parts of the boat as well. And you see here that the first use of steel frames, the first America's Cup boat with cross-cut sails, the first hollow steel mast, the first multi-speed winches, all taking place here, all being invented by the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company for these America's Cup boats. Also, materials engineering had to be strong and light, so not one size fits all, right? So you have the USS Cushing, which is the first torpedo boat. that thing needed to be very light so it could go fast, because with that boat it was all about speed. It needed to go 26 knots, and if it went less, they weren't going to get paid as much. Reliance needed to survive 3 races. It did want to take this thing out in the ocean. It had a total of 20 frames for its entire 144-foot length, so not a lot of structure in there. And then the last one on the right is Couture, which is an ocean racing schooner. So this thing needed to be able to survive transatlantic crossings. So very different ways of thinking about the structure, trying to get light all the time. And the cool thing was, the amazing thing was, it was really all orchestrated by 2 guys. So you have John Herreshoff, completely blind, but he ran the whole business side. He was the CEO, the CFO, and the CMO. Well, they didn't probably do a lot of CMOing. Captain Nat was the sole engineer and designer, as well as the superintendent of the shop. So he designed every boat and oversaw the construction of every boat. He had 3 to 4 draftsmen supporting him, but that was really it. So it was these 2 guys. Now, the output of the company at this point is nothing short of astonishing, but these guys don't really play much. It's a 6-day work week. It starts at 6 o'clock in the morning, but all their employees are pretty passionate about what they do, and so they come and they stay. So how do they do it? The management consultants in the crowd will recognize this sort of standard business process illustration. Nothing earth-shattering here, but it does provide a lens through which we've been able to understand and illustrate what made this company work, and what made it tick, and what made it so unique and so far ahead of its time. I'll point out a couple of examples in each of these areas, but I think it's important to know that to really make this work, you need excellence both within each building block and in the efficient integration of all of them. So we'll look at customer acquisition, we'll look at product design and development, production engineering, manufacturing, and aftermarket support. That's really the life cycle of a product. And each building block was optimized individually. So first, from a customer acquisition perspective, the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, worked pretty well for HMCo, just as well then as it does today. They had a relatively small number of serial customers who basically bought the entire product line. They came back again and again, recommending HMCo to their friends and essentially funding HMCo R&D efforts. Here's E.D. Morgan, our buddy from Gloriana, and he was what you'd call a pretty good customer. He kept coming back and buying another boat, and kept coming back and buying another boat, and he told his friends. So that was a big thing for these guys, having guys like this, and there were a number of them. They also had their emphasis on earned media, and the marketers in the audience will understand this. Really not paid media, not going out and advertising like they said they wouldn't, but they're getting lots of PR. They're getting people to write about them. They're also, as I said earlier, not above the odd publicity stunt like the one they did with STILETTO. They've got a lot of orders from high-profile yacht clubs to build one design fleets for them. So the word's getting out that way too to yacht club members. And they also recognized that the owners were important, but the captains of the boats were also important, the masters. So understanding that these guys were key influencers was really important. They also, from a production perspective, the design process that they used, going back to the model room that you saw earlier, was very unique, and it really improved the time that they could. The time that it took them to build a boat. Because Nat started with a half hull, he could carve it in 3 or 4 days, and then they would go they would take the offsets right off of that half hull. You can see the machine on the right that they would use to do that he would use to do that. So he'd take the XY coordinates off of that half hull at every frame, and then hand those numbers off to the builders. So the builders would subtract the thickness of the planking, the thickness of the frames, and they would start building the mold for the boat. So now you've gone from ordering the boat, designing the boat, to building the boat in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks instead of 3 to 4 months. In his engineering notes, we see that he's addressing design optimization with a slide rule and a number 2 pencil. No computers here. Every design he does starts out as a half hull. You saw the room, and this is how he's getting getting designs from the drafting table to the lofting floor. They didn't do any lines plans. There were only construction drawings. The lines plans were replaced by this block of pine. The Sewanaka rules we talked about with Reliance encouraged very long overhangs. In the years prior to 1903, designers were working on structural engineering techniques that would allow them to create longer, thinner, lighter structures that wouldn't fold up like a $2 suitcase. But they weren't the only ones working on that. There were some other guys trying to do that too. And this was around the same time. And there's these engineering societies that are starting to happen where engineers are starting to share ideas. One of the things that's interesting about this is that the Rolling Wire Road Company, the guys that built the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, are also supplying wire to both the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company for Reliance and to the Wright brothers for the Wright Flyer. The 90s, 1890s were a period of a lot of experimentation, and essentially a lot of stuff happened during that time frame that impacts design and construction of boats even today. You need a pretty big boat for legit tank testing, something on the order of 20 feet. But before tank testing had really come into vogue, the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company is basically experimenting on its customers. So these boats are all racing in the same class, the 21-foot class. And you can see that they're all pretty radically different. So this is how Nat is doing his R&D. This is customer-funded R&D. Customers come to him and ask him to build him a 21-footer, and he decides, well, let's try this. And you can see that they come out with all kinds of different hull shapes and keel types. He's also making the process faster by reusing drawings. So he's taking old drawings and making red line changes to them. You see in the process that in the build of Reliance, only about 43% of the drawings were new. All the other ones were left over from other boats. From an engineering perspective, for manufacturability, we all know design engineers and we know production engineers. Design engineers never really have to worry about how stuff's going to get built. They just design really cool stuff, and they hand it off to the production engineers. The production engineers hate them because they've given them something that they now can't manufacture for that amount of money. And so the interesting thing about Nat Herreshoff is that he's both. He's both the design engineer and the production engineer. So he's not designing anything that can't be made easily and quickly, on time, on budget, for a profit. So this is a spar jig that he's essentially built, that he's designed for building spars. This was the design for the topmast for Reliance. The topmast for Reliance actually telescoped out of the top of a steel mainmast. So it had to have a constant constant outside diameter to be able to telescope out without wobbling around. So they tapered it from the inside. And this design is the way that they did that. So it was actually pretty easy to do that using these jigs and building these masts out of eight staves. I have friends who are design engineers and they don't like production engineers. So that's the pain point. Very, very tight project management controls, all these schedules, everything's very carefully documented, written out, handed off to the build team. They're also standardizing parts. This is early mass customization. You see here what's called a monitor. It's the thing that the windows that open up on the deck to let light and air in. The lifeboat that a lot of these boats carried upside down on the deck. You could ask for whatever you wanted in this regard, but what you would get was the standard Herreshoff Manufacturing Company lifeboat and monitor. They also had completely standardized all the fittings, and so they had them all on shelves, all ready to go. The hooks, the blocks, the shackles, the cleats, all in 3 different sizes. They were also using flat panel displays back then, which is hard to believe, but this is their version of a flat panel display. And this is actually interesting because they could, using this technique, we talk about, we talk about rapid prototyping and using this technique. So this was a board, a pattern board that the draftsman would draw the part on and put it up over the machinist's workstation. And then they would cast the part in the they would cast the part and then hand it off to the machinist to machine. So they could design a part for a boat and have it on the boat 24 hours later to experiment with it. Also in 1899, what we see here is a completely vertically integrated company with about 250 employees. So they're making every single part of every single boat right on campus. If you show up in the fall and order a boat for the next spring, it's going to be there sitting at the end of the dock, and it's going to have the mast, it's going to have the boom, it's going to have the sails, it's going to have the cushions, the boat hook, the anchor, the bucket, everything. Everything was made right on campus, the cleats, the blocks, the winches. And so there was they never had to wait for parts for anybody else. And it really helped them sort of speed production all the way along. The number of employees is believed to have been about 350 by 1903. The aftermarket, the final piece is the aftermarket service and support, and this was essentially a strategy that was all about creating stickiness. It wasn't really that different from what luxury brands do today, like Hinkley or Mercedes. They lavish attention on their biggest customers, and they leverage the concept of proprietary fittings and continuous improvement to keep their other customers coming back over and over and over. So we can wrap it up here. That's the story of the boat and the people in the company that made it possible. On the one hand, Reliance was an incredible achievement. It was, the biggest, most technically complex single-masted sailing yacht in the world, and it was built in record time. Boat's incredible. But taking a look at the boat in the context of what was going on at the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company at that time teaches us some compelling stories about what makes HMCo special. What HMCo did was amazing, and when we start to figure out how they did what they did, it's clear that it was a 19th century version of a modern high-tech business with lessons for today's business leaders. How much time do I have, Tom?
It's up to Ron.
1 minute? Okay. I'll use that minute to just give you a quick update on the museum. We have a lot of stuff going on there these days, and hopefully, if you're out at the East Coast, I know Kimball was out a couple of years ago, and hopefully, if you guys get out there, if any of you get out there, you'll come and see us. 2018 was a pretty good year for us. We had touched about 800 kids through our Herreshoff STEAM education program, both on land and on sea. We had over 800 high school students build boats through our Skiff School Marine Trades program. We have 240 fourth graders, all of the fourth graders in the Bristol Warren school system coming sailing at the museum. They're doing half the day classroom stuff where they're talking about sailing and STEM, and the other half of the day they're actually going sailing and putting those concepts to use. So the idea here is to have every single fourth grader in the Bristol Warren school system go through this process twice a year, spring and fall, and keep doing that every year. Pretty cool program. Last year we had over 10,000 visitors at the museum. We raised over $1 million in grant sponsorships, partnerships, and restricted and unrestricted giving. And somewhat, almost the most important thing, although it's last on the list, is from an access and preservation perspective. We digitized over 900 historic photos, 400 images of artifacts, and over 1,600 images of boats in our collection, so that we can then post these online and give people from who aren't in Rhode Island the opportunity to see them. And that's what I have.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Welcome again to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Our guest today is Bill Lynn, President and Executive Director of the famous Herreshoff Museum. So, talk to us just a little bit, Bill, on John and Nathaniel's business. What did their dad do? What were their parents like? Did they sail at all?
Their parents were sailors, and when you lived in Rhode Island at that time, you kind of had to be a sailor because there were no bridges and the roads weren't great. So if you wanted to get anywhere, you typically went in a boat because you had Narragansett Bay. You guys have it here. You want to get from, without that bridge, if you want to get from, here to there, you're hopping in your catboat and that's how you're getting there. So the parents, the whole family had been sailors for a long time, and they were also related to, they had Browns and they had the Wolves and they had, if anybody's ever spent a lot of time in Rhode Island, you know that there's probably 8 last names that sort of everybody has, and they're pretty well to do. And so, the father didn't really need to work very hard.
What was the father's trade or business?
He was, he didn't really have one. He was a bit of a tinkerer. He liked to build things. He liked to build boats. Never really had to have a job. They had a farm in Rhode Island that he tended, so that was part of his gig. But for the most part, he just tinkered.
And you mentioned 6 o'clock, getting to work at 6 in the morning. What were the hours of the employees? Was it starting at 6 days a week? When did they finish?
Yeah, they finished at around 4 or 5. So it's a long day, but they didn't work very late.
What do they pay their employees?
I don't know. I do not know.
Do they have long employee retention?
They had very long employee retention. It was one of the things that was somewhat interesting and unique about the Herreshoff Manufacturing Company was that their employees stayed with them for a long time. There are employees that worked there throughout their entire lives.
And what did a Reliance cost? What did they charge for it?
Reliance cost $174,000, which I think. Yeah, exactly. I think that sort of equates to about $4.5 million in today's.
And so when they were basically making sails, what kind of innovations in the sails? We all know about their hull innovations. So what kind of innovations did they come up with in sails?
Well, they invented the cross-cut sail. Up until then, what you saw, if you look at pictures of old boats, you see these vertical seams in the sails, and Nat Herreshoff came up with the concept of actually rotating the panels so that they were perpendicular to the leech, as opposed to parallel to the leech. There were a number of innovations along that front too. They also invented the sail track and slides, so you didn't have to have hoops going around the mast, and that actually was a bit of a game changer because if you have hoops, your ability to have spreaders is pretty limited. So once you switch from hoops to a sail track and slides, now you can have more spreaders, which results in maybe a skinnier mast and things like that.
Speaking of sails, one-time sailmaker, lifelong artist, Mallory Cup winner Jimmy DeWitt has a question. Jimmy.
Reliance, the mast was hollow. Did people go up in the mast?
People did not go up in the mast, although when they were building the mast, people went inside it because when they were riveting it together, they had to have somebody on the inside. And so that person probably didn't hear very well. Actually, L. Francis Herreshoff, who was another well-known yacht designer, son of one of the sons of Nat Herreshoff, reports that when he was a kid, he was assigned that job, and so he had to go in there and get his brains beaten out. But no, there was nobody inside the mast while they were racing, but there was somebody up the mast quite frequently while they were racing.
There goes one of the stories I heard as a kid. But they went up there and did some work while they were racing.
So how many boats, sail and power, did they build in the history of the company?
Over 2,000. The number is not totally clear because not all of them ended up in the order book. But it was something on the order of 2,200.
And so what was revenue of the company like in the prime years or in any years?
I actually don't know that. I don't know the answer to that. We may have that information somewhere, but I'm not sure what it is.
And how much of their business was military versus commercial?
Well, it started out when they were in the powerboat business, being quite heavily military. They built boats for a number of navies. As you know, back in the 1870s, the U.S. Navy wasn't much. After the Civil War, The focus had been on sort of westward expansion and reconstruction after the Civil War. The Navy was sort of allowed to fall apart. Teddy Roosevelt came along and started advocating for a stronger Navy, but up until that point, they were mostly building boats for the Spanish Navy, the Russian Navy, the Royal Navy, the Peruvian Navy. The Peruvians had a bigger Navy than us back then. And so a lot of the work that they were doing on the powerboat front was for all of these other navies. What happened is in 1890 and 1891, 92 is, the America's Cup thing happens. What's happening at the same time is that they're starting to build torpedo boats for the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Navy is becoming more and more bureaucratic. So every time they go to build a torpedo boat, there's 7 different bureaus who are all, showing up at the shop and telling Nat what he should and shouldn't do, which he didn't take very kindly to. And so the New York Yacht Club guys would show up and just dump a big bag of money on the table and push it across the table and say, let us know when it's done. And so he was sort of wanted to work for those guys much more than he wanted to work for the Navy. So that was sort of a big shift from Navy work to America's Cup.
Speaking of good sailors, Kim Dessenberg has a question. Kim.
I wondered, in the heyday of their building, were they all in one facility, or did they have multiple facilities?
Well, there's a number of buildings. The museum is now on the campus of the old Herreshoff Manufacturing Company. There are a number of buildings, probably 8 or 9 altogether, because they had they had massive construction shops on the waterfront. They had a spar shop, they had a sail loft, they had a foundry, they had a blacksmith shop, boiler shop, a machine shop. So all these different buildings, storage, and all that kind of stuff.
My other question is, I always wanted a telescoping mast, and I wondered if those were successful, and were they just eliminated by rules, or did they not work?
Well, it was successful, but it essentially was eliminated by convenience, I guess. So once you come up, the telescoping mast you essentially need because you have, with a gaff rig. So when the move from gaff rigs to Marconi rigs happened, it became less of an issue. So unless you needed to get under a bridge, I suppose, when it would come in handy. But for the most part, with the shift from gaff rigs to Marconi rigs, the need for a telescopic top mast disappeared.
How fast were those torpedo boats that they did?
Well, every year they got faster. Back then, the contracts for these boats were actually written in terms of a top speed, and all the bids by all the builders were all in terms of a top speed. They started out at 23, 24 knots, and by the late 1890s, Herreshoff was talking about the 30-knot torpedo boat, the elusive 30-knot torpedo boat, and they had a plan for that, which they never actually built.
So we're hearing a lot about history, and it's great to get a question from our esteemed Commodore staff member, Tim.
Couple things, Bill. First, am I correct that the design and build of Reliance was driven by a scare from 1900 when they realized the boat they built could have won? Also, maybe we can get you to talk a little bit about that amazing model of Reliance that I never got to see.
Absolutely. In 1899, Columbia won the Cup with Charlie Barr at the helm. In 1901, the New York Yacht Club asked Herreshoff to build a new defender for them, and he built Constitution. Constitution was more advanced than Columbia in a lot of different ways, but unfortunately, the guy who was in charge of it was not a very good driver. And so Charlie Barr ended up winning the trials with the older boat. And so that was a problem for Herreshoff. He had a big issue with that because he knew in his heart of hearts that the new boat was better. So the old boat goes off to sail against the new Shamrock and barely wins. So that was the scare that you're talking about. I think they realized that they really needed to push the envelope in 1902, 1903. Nat had a boat design, but it wasn't quite radical enough, and so the syndicate convinced him to really push it to the edge, which he was not terribly happy about doing. On the model that Kimball mentions, there has been built at the museum a 1/6 scale model of Reliance. Thank God we don't have the real thing, because it would literally take up the entire museum. But this 1/6 scale model is rather large in and of itself. So if you know the size of the boat, it's 200 feet long from the tip of the boom to the tip of the bowsprit. So a 1/6 scale model is 30-something feet. So this is quite an achievement. It was built over the period of a number of years by a team of volunteers at the museum, and it is absolutely spectacular. Every single part of it was made the way the original part was made, essentially lost wax castings for the winches, for the cleats, for all that stuff. It is absolutely amazing. And it turns out that G.I. Joes are actually 1/6 scale people. And so it will, which come from another good Rhode Island company. And so as it turns out, it will have a crew of 72 G.I. Joes eventually. And one of our volunteers has actually sewn all of the uniforms, all of the clothing for all the G.I. Joes. Another one of our volunteers is a sculptor, and he's actually sculpted exact replicas of some of the heads of these guys. So there will be a Nat Herreshoff, a Charlie Barr, an Oliver Island, and so it will be kind of fun when all of that piece of it is done.
If Nathanael Herreshoff was here and he could compliment you on that model and the great work at the museum, what might you imagine they'd like about it?
I think if Nat Herreshoff showed up on Earth today and he saw us sailing 100-year-old boats, he would wonder what was wrong with us. He was such an innovator, such a cutting-edge thinker and engineer and designer that I think he would be, I was talking about this the other day with Russell. I think he would be down at the Sail GP compound telling those guys what they should be doing differently with the foiling cats. That's where he would be.
Speaking of good sailors, Gordon Danielson, you have a question?
Yeah, so just one simple question. Why did they go out of business?
Well, they went out of business, I think, for the same reason that one of the things that made them successful is it was two guys. John died in 1915 and Nat retired in 1925. But there really was no succession plan on that front. And actually, the company first got a little wobbly in 1915 when John died. It was probably more dependent on his business acumen than it was on Nat's design and construction acumen. It was the first time where they actually had to take outside money. There were a bunch of people who had boats that were being built, and they realized that if they wanted their boats, they needed to probably put some cash into the business, and so they did. And that was sort of the beginning of the slide. Eventually, with Nat retired, the company was purchased by another family, the Haffenreffer family, who ran it through World War II and then decided to shut it down.
Did they use typewriters at HMCo?
It appears that they did later on. A lot of our papers are typewritten, but most of them are handwritten, and almost all the design documents are handwritten.
How can people who are enthusiastic about the beauty of the museum and craftsmanship with which you carried on this legacy, how can we help?
Well, you can join. You can come visit. We would love to have you. We'd love to host you. We'd love to give you a tour. We have a number of initiatives that are underway right now on taking our education program to the next level. We're always looking for people who are interested in getting involved in that piece of it in particular. We have an opportunity that I think is very unique to create a STEM, an experiential STEM educational experience that is unlike any other. When we combine the stories in the museum that are about innovation, and then the ability to actually have kids, in boats on the waterfront, being inspired by the actual product, the company's product. We have kids sailing Herreshoff 12.5s. And then we have a boat shop where we take the kids and actually hand them tools and teach them how to design and build boats.
Wonderful, thank you. Our guest today has been Bill Lynn, President and Executive Director of the Herreshoff Museum. Bill, thank you very much for joining the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, and with that, the luncheon is adjourned.
And we will be out.
No. I can get over this way. Yeah.